Parker Quartet are returning to Columbia as part of the Chamber Music Maryland Concert Series. This will be Saturday, May 30th at 7:30 p.m., Smith Theater, Howard Community College. I had the pleasure of speaking with their first violinist, Daniel Chung, a little earlier in the week via Zoom on the program Music by Beethoven, Wianko, and Brahms. Daniel, despite the fact that Brahms wrote endless amounts of chamber music, and string quartets are usually such defining works for composers, Brahms' string quartets are among his least known works of chamber music, I think.
I think that they're extremely difficult to get a grasp on. I also think that the first two, the C minor and A minor, sort of stand in one corner, and then this Opus 67 B flat stands in another. Although the B flat Opus 67 is more eccentric, I think it's more approachable in many ways. He himself considered it his favorite string quartet. He wrote it fairly easily, unlike the C minor and A minor, where it was a real struggle for him to get through and be finally pleased with, as with many things. But the B flat, we know in his letters that came fairly easily for him, maybe in a few months span of time. Of course, during the summers when he would usually write music, but he was very happy about it, very pleased with it. And it also finds him unusually in a very good-natured mood. It's a very positive quartet. He doesn't shy away from a scherzo, for example. He had a lot of trouble with that form, and he would replace it often with things like intermezzos and things of that sort. So here we have a scherzo, and here we have Brahms generally in a very good mood, a gorgeous slow movement, and then a theme and variations last movement. And I think he felt very comfortable in that form. As we know, that was his introduction to the symphony with his Haydn variations and such, and so he felt that was very much in his wheelhouse.
And the concert's beginning with Beethoven's epic, short but epic Serioso Quartet.
In the Opus 95, the reason why it's got its nickname Serioso is for the serious listeners, right? In many ways, he didn't write this for the public. I really think he wrote this as a experiment for himself, an experiment that was centered around limiting himself and seeing what he could do with as little as possible. One of the things you hear right from the beginning is that there are very few transitions from one idea to another. It's almost like they're juxtaposed right up against each other. And that makes for a quartet that somewhere floats at the end of his middle period. It's not quite in his late period, but I like to think of it as the precursor to the late period. Even if you think about the second movement, there are these isolated hovering chords that seem to come out of nowhere, a kind of stream of conscious technique that he uses in his late quartets. But nevertheless, the whole quartet is very compact. It's one of his shortest. It's about 20 minutes long. He gets right to the point, but inside of it, it's what you would expect Beethoven's world to be, full of contrast, full of drama. The introduction to the main body of the last movement in particular is just stunning music. Another iconic example of Beethoven using a slow introduction to set up just incredible material.
Why do you think composers use string quartets for their most profound and intimate thoughts?
I think there's honesty about it. I think that there's a simplicity to it. I think there's a versatility to it. That's something I've really thought long and hard about. I think part of it at some point became a tradition. Part of it somehow rose to be the symbolic genre, even to this day. What's funny when I think about Beethoven, and when he first came to Vienna, one of his goals was to meet Mozart. In his arms, he had a pile of scores that he had written, and none of them were string quartets. What he wanted to show Mozart was the string trios because he knew that there was too much pressure behind string quartets. I got to show this guy something different. I got to find my own niche. And only later did he come to the court. So already at that point, the string quartet after Haydn and Mozart had built this enormous pressure.
The Parker Quartet has literally been around for decades. What is it like to be in a string quartet that has such a long and successful history?
There's a running joke that a quartet is a four-way marriage with all of the bad stuff and all the good stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really abide by that outlook. The social relationships and the working relationship, artistic relationships, the relationships that are within a string quartet, I can't think of another one quite like it. It overlaps with so many different, more conventional relationships, perhaps to your spouse, to your children, to your friends, to professional colleagues. And it is an intense one. I won't lie to you. When you're working with the same three people day in and day out, and you're working on material that is heavy, profound, major, it is a chemistry that can often create a lot of challenging circumstances because people really care and people really love this music and it's really intimate and each voice is accountable and individual and needs to be heard, and yet you're striving for something as a collective. And then on top of that, not only are you in the rehearsal room together, but you're traveling together. You are discussing things outside of the rehearsal room that deal with the quartet, and you're away from your families together. And there's a real social bond that is beyond just being friends. The closest thing I can compare it to is family. It's an extension of family. And the thing about quartets is that every dynamic in each group is very different. We all know about the Guarneri quartet and how they don't want anything to do with each other as much as possible, right? In our quartet, there's a real sense of fellowship, a real sense of kindness, and a real sense of positivity. And I think that's what's kept us going for over 20 years. Three of us are original to the group, and Ken, our second violinist, joined in 2018. It feels like he's been in the quartet for much, much longer. But it really is a special relationship, and it's very hard to describe, but it probably inhabits all different kinds of qualities that we find in many of our other relationships. It just happens to all be very intensely in one thing.
The Parker Quartet will be performing Saturday, May 30th at 7:30 p.m. at Smith Theater, Howard Community College in Columbia. You can find out more at chambermusicmaryland.org.